You think sex is just about pleasure, but deep down, you know it's more than that. There are thoughts you never say out loud, fantasies you keep hidden, even from yourself, desires that rise in the silence, and shame that follows close behind. But what if those urges weren't a problem? What if they were a message, a mirror, held up by your unconscious, showing you a part of yourself you've refused to see? Carl Jung didn't believe sex was just biological. He believed it was psychological fire, the energy of your soul trying to speak. And the more you ignore it, the more it takes over from the shadows. This video is not about behavior. It's about the unseen power of sexual energy inside your mind. The desire that doesn't just live in your body, but in your dreams, your wounds, your relationships, and your identity. You'll discover how repressed sexuality creates your shadow, how attraction is often projection, and how your deepest fantasies reveal your unhealed parts. If you've ever felt ashamed of your desire, if you've ever wondered why sex holds such power in your life, stay. Not to be judged, but to understand. Because the parts of you you've labeled dirty are often the parts that carry your greatest truth. Let's begin. 1. Sex is not just physical. It's psychological energy. Sex isn't just something that happens in the body. It begins in the imagination, long before the touch, long before the moment. It moves through the nervous system like a quiet flame, awakening not only sensation, but emotion. There is something spiritual about it, even if no one ever says it out loud. Carl Jung called this force libido, but not just in the way Freud meant. Freud saw it mostly as a biological drive. Jung saw it as something more universal, a symbolic energy that fuels creativity, connection, longing, and transformation. He believed sexuality was one face of the psyche's life force, raw, wild, and deeply human. When you feel sexual attraction, it's not always about the body of another. Sometimes, it's your soul reaching for something it feels is missing in itself. Desire becomes a signal, pulling you toward growth, not just pleasure, but most people don't know how to listen. Instead, society teaches you to either act on it impulsively or suppress it entirely. Neither helps you understand it. Both approaches keep you disconnected from yourself and from others, because what you repress, you never get to know. Sexual energy is one of the purest forms of psychic vitality. It can inspire art. It can build intimacy. It can destroy illusions. But only if you recognize it, not as taboo but as truth. And truth always has power. Think of the times you felt overwhelmed by a craving, not just for sex, but for union, closeness, or even the feeling of being wanted. That wasn't just lust. That was longing for wholeness. It was your psyche's cry to return to something forgotten. Jung believed that libido wasn't just erotic. He said it was the fundamental energy of life, the urge to move, to grow, to unite opposites. Sexuality was simply one way. It expressed itself. And when misunderstood, it became the most distorted. If you've ever felt guilty for wanting more, if you've ever chased passion, only to feel emptier afterward, it's because you were chasing the surface of desire, not the source. And that source is always psychological. Real sexuality isn't performative. It's not something to be graded, proven, or displayed. It's a current that flows from the deepest place inside of you. And if you trace it all the way back, it leads to the soul. In Jung's view, ignoring this force doesn't silence it. It pushes it into the unconscious. And once it's there, it shows up in ways you don't expect. In your dreams, your fantasies, your attachments, even your fears. It never disappears. It only changes form. That's why this work matters. Not to fix your behavior, but to meet the energy beneath it. Because when you meet that energy with awareness, you don't become less human. You become whole. 2. The shadow of repressed desire. Desire that isn't welcomed doesn't disappear. It sinks. It slips beneath the surface of your awareness and settles into your unconscious. There it doesn't rest. It waits. Carl Jung called this space the shadow. It's the part of you you try not to see. The part you deny, reject, judge, or hide. But it never stops wanting to be known. When sexual desire is repressed, not understood, but shamed, it turns inward. It becomes anger, guilt, or obsession. Sometimes, it becomes projection onto others. You might notice yourself criticizing someone's clothing, not because it offends you, but because it awakens something in you. You've been told to suppress. You might feel envy at someone's freedom, not because you disapprove, but because deep down, you crave it too. The shadow doesn't just carry your rage or fear, it also carries your unlived vitality, the wildness you buried to feel safe, the fire you dimmed to be accepted. When you repress sexual energy, you're not just avoiding scandal, you're cutting yourself off from a powerful part of your own humanity. And that disconnection comes with a cost that shows up in places you don't expect. It shows up in relationships that feel hollow, in fantasies that take over your mind, in addictions that don't make sense but feel impossible to stop, in the fear of being seen too deeply or touched too gently. Jung wrote, "Until you make the unconscious conscious, it will direct your life and you will call it fate." Repressed desire becomes your fate when you refuse to face it. And the more you deny it, the more it leaks through the cracks. In your words, in your silence, in your gaze. Think about how many people secretly suffer from shame around their sexuality. They smile on the outside, but carry guilt that eats at them alone. They learn to perform normality while drowning in contradiction. This is the price of splitting yourself in two. But here's the deeper truth. Your sexual energy isn't evil. It's not something to purify or eliminate. It's something to understand. Because what lives in the shadow becomes distorted. What's repressed turns into compulsion or judgment or obsession. But what's brought into the light can become sacred, even beautiful. Healing doesn't mean becoming less sexual. It means becoming less afraid of your own depth, less ashamed of your longing, more honest about what's alive inside of you. There is a kind of peace that comes from no longer running, a freedom that begins the moment you stop labeling your desire as dangerous and start seeing it as a mirror, one that shows you not who you pretend to be, but who you really are. 3. Anima, Animus, and the sexual mirror. Not every attraction is about the other person. Sometimes, it's about a part of you trying to return home. Jung believed that when you fall deeply, irrationally, even obsessively in love, you're often encountering a piece of your own psyche that you haven't fully integrated. He called it the Anima and Animus, two inner figures that live inside all of us. The Anima is the feminine energy within a man. The Animus is the masculine energy within a woman. These aren't about gender roles. They're about the deep emotional and spiritual qualities we carry, whether we express them or not. And when one of these archetypes is undeveloped, it often appears outside of us, projected onto someone else, someone who seems magnetic, mysterious, or even divine. That's why some people seem to glow when you look at them, not because they're perfect, but because they reflect back to you something you've been unconsciously longing to meet, something soft, strong, intuitive, or alive, something you haven't yet claimed in yourself. When a man dreams of a seductive woman who feels both dangerous and irresistible, it may not be about her at all. It may be his anima, emerging from the depths, asking to be known. Likewise, a woman pulled toward a stoic, powerful figure may be meeting her own animus, her strength not yet owned. This is the deeper dimension of desire. It's not always about touch. Sometimes, it's about recognition, seeing something that was hidden inside of you, reflected in the face of another. Jung taught that to grow psychologically, we must begin a relationship with our inner anima or animus. Not just romantic relationships outside, but a sacred dialogue within. What does your inner feminine want to feel? What does your inner masculine long to build or protect? Many relationships collapse not because of incompatibility, but because we expect the other person to fulfill what we've neglected in ourselves. We project ideal images onto them, and when they fail to live up to those fantasies, we blame them instead of waking up. This is why certain crushes, infatuations, or even obsessions feel so intense. They carry a charge beyond logic, because they're not just about the person, they're about a missing part of your own wholeness that is trying to return. The sexual mirror isn't just physical, it's psychological and symbolic. Every attraction holds a message if you have the courage to ask what it reveals. And sometimes that message is, come back to yourself. The people who captivate you are not always meant to stay, but they might be meant to awaken, to stir something that has long slept, to remind you that the love you seek often begins within. And until you turn inward, you'll keep chasing your own reflection in someone else's face, mistaking the echo for the origin, and never quite feeling complete. 4. Projection. You're not in love, you're in a fantasy. There are moments when love feels like magic. You meet someone, and something electric moves through you. You feel seen, alive, and finally complete. But what if what you're feeling has little to do with them? Carl Jung warned that much of what we call love is actually projection. It's when you take a hidden part of yourself, your longing, your hope, your pine, and unconsciously place it onto another person. You don't fall for them. You fall for the part of you they reflect. That's why some relationships feel so intense, even when they're short-lived. You're not in love with who they are. You're in love with what they represent. An ideal, a rescuer, a dream you didn't know you were still chasing. Maybe they remind you of a parent who was distant. Maybe they reflect your hunger to be desired, protected, or understood. Maybe their silence awakens your need to prove your worth. The feelings are real, but the source is not always clear. This is what makes projection so powerful. You believe it's about the present moment, but it's often about unfinished stories from your past. And that story begins inside your own unconscious. The problem is not projection itself. Jung said, projection is natural. It's how we relate to the world. But suffering begins when you mistake the projection for the truth. When you hold someone hostage to an image they never agreed to carry, you expect them to heal your wounds without knowing what those wounds are. You assign them a role in your fantasy, and when they fail to play it, you feel betrayed. But in truth, they never promised to be your savior. They were simply being who they are. Projection is like painting someone else's face with the colors of your soul, and then feeling heartbroken when the rain washes it away. The pain is real, but it is not theirs to fix. It is yours to understand. Ask yourself this: what did I fall in love with? Was it their kindness, or my hunger for safety? Was it their mystery, or my longing to feel special? Was it their silence, or my need to be chosen? When love begins as projection, it often ends in confusion, because no human can fulfill an image born from your own unmet needs. Eventually, the illusion cracks, and what's left is either resentment or awakening. But here is the gift. When you recognize the projection, you begin to reclaim yourself. You see the parts of you that were lost, disowned, or forgotten, and instead of seeking them in others, you start to welcome them home. This is how love matures. Not by eliminating desire, but by seeing through its disguise. Not by blaming others for our emptiness, but by meeting the longing underneath with compassion. You may not be in love with the person, you may be in love with the possibility they represent. And once you see that clearly, you are finally free to love without illusion. 5. Sex and spiritual awakening. The sacred fire. There is a reason why desire feels like fire. It doesn't just warm you. It can consume you, break you open, or turn you into someone new. And sometimes, it's meant to. Throughout history, spiritual traditions have wrestled with sexuality. Some tried to suppress it. Others tried to sanctify it. But those who looked deeper saw something more. They saw desire as a doorway, not a distraction from God, but a path toward the soul, not a sin to escape, but a force to understand. Jung believed that if you approach sex with awareness, it becomes a mirror for transformation. He saw libido not just as physical energy, but as the psychic current that moves your entire being. The same force that creates life also awakens insight. The body, the mind, and the spirit are never truly separate. In certain mystical paths, like Tantra, sexuality is sacred. It's not just about union with another. It's about union within yourself. A reconciliation of opposites that opens your heart to presence. In Christian mysticism, too, the language of divine longing often mirrors erotic desire. The soul thirsts. The heart aches. These are not metaphors of weakness. They are echoes of something eternal. Because when you allow yourself to feel deeply, without shame, you begin to touch something ancient and alive. Désir becomes dévotion. Longing becomes light. This is what Jung meant when he said sex could be a spiritual experience. Not in the act alone, but in the awareness it demands. The courage to be present, the vulnerability to be seen, and the humility to surrender control. There is something holy in the rawness of desire, not because it's pure, but because it's honest. It strips away pretense. It brings you back to the truth of your longing. And in that longing, there is a path, not to indulgence, but to integration, not to escape, but to encounter. You don't need to fear the fire inside you. You need to learn how to tend it, how to listen when it speaks, how to follow it when it leads inward, not outward. Because the deepest awakenings often begin in the most uncomfortable places, and sex, when seen through sacred eyes, is not the enemy of your soul. It is the spark that reminds you, you are already whole, even in your hunger. 6. What you're afraid to admit. Your fantasy reveals your wound. Most people think fantasies are meaningless. Just random images or secret desires they're too ashamed to say out loud. But what if they're not random at all? What if your fantasies are messages from your wounds? Carl Jung believed the psyche speaks in symbols, not through logic, but through images, sensations, and dreams. Your sexual fantasies aren't just about pleasure. They are attempts to reorganize the pain you've never processed. The mind replays what the heart never healed. And often, the scenarios you imagine, over and over, are not about lust. They are about power, vulnerability, control, acceptance, or being chosen. Each one tells a story you haven't finished writing. Maybe you fantasize about being pursued relentlessly. That may not be about seduction. It might be the ache of never feeling wanted, the longing to be seen without asking. Or maybe your fantasies revolve around submission, not because you're weak, but because you carry the exhaustion of always needing to be strong. And somewhere deep inside, you long to let go. What you fantasize about in private often reflects what you were denied in childhood. Love that was conditional, touch that was absent, safety that was never promised. This is not something to be ashamed of. It's something to understand. Because your fantasy isn't your flaw, it's your psyche's way of revealing where you're still hurting. When you look closely, your mind isn't trying to corrupt you. It's trying to heal you, in the only language it knows. And that language is often intimate, symbolic, and emotionally charged. Because the deeper the pain, the more intense the image. Jung never encouraged repression. He encouraged relationship with the unconscious. A willingness to sit with the image and ask, what do you need from me? What haven't I heard? Sometimes the fantasy repeats because the wound is still bleeding. Sometimes it escalates because you haven't yet felt safe enough to feel. But when you meet it with compassion instead of judgment, it starts to soften. That moment of insight can be life-changing. You no longer feel controlled by your imagination. You begin to see that behind every craving is a memory, and behind every memory is a need that wants to be honored. This is not about acting on every fantasy. It's about learning from them, letting them point you to the places inside that still feel incomplete, and offering those places your attention, not your avoidance. Because the more you reject your fantasies, the more they take root in secrecy. But when you name them gently, they become invitations, not threats. You are not broken because of what you imagine. You are simply carrying stories no one helped you translate. And now, you have the chance to listen. 7. Integrating your sexual shadow. Becoming whole. Wholeness doesn't come from being perfect. It comes from no longer hiding the parts of you were taught to fear. And for many, the part that has been most deeply exiled is their sexuality. Not just the act, but the energy, the emotion, the truth it carries. Carl Jung believed that the path to healing was not through denial, but through integration. To meet the shadow, not with shame, but with curiosity, honesty, and care. Your sexual shadow is not your enemy. It is the part of you that still holds your intensity, your creativity, your hunger to feel alive. It formed when your desire was met with silence, judgment, or rejection. And it learned to survive by hiding. But what hides in the dark still longs for light. It doesn't want to control you. It wants to be seen, heard, and welcomed without punishment. Because only in that space can it begin to transform. To integrate your sexual shadow means sitting with the thoughts you usually push away. It means asking, what does this craving really want? Not just physically, but emotionally, spiritually, humanly. You might discover it's not about sex at all. It's about connection, or freedom, or worth. This is where inner work becomes sacred. You begin to make peace with what once frightened you. You stop labeling parts of yourself as bad, and you start listening to what they've been trying to tell you for years. There is a quiet power in no longer hiding, in being able to say, this is a part of me, and it belongs. That statement is not indulgent. It is healing. Many people try to kill desire, but the goal is not to kill it. It is to understand it, to mature it, to hold it with depth. Because only then can desire serve something greater than impulse. When you integrate your sexual shadow, something shifts. You feel less reactive, less controlled by fantasy, more rooted in presence. You stop chasing intensity for the sake of escape. You begin to choose experiences that honor your truth, not distract from your pain. And slowly, the shame begins to dissolve. Not because you have no shadow, but because you are no longer afraid of it. This is what it means to become whole. Not to become pure in the eyes of others, but to become honest in the presence of your own soul. To walk with every part of you, not just the parts that look acceptable. You were never meant to be divided against yourself. You were meant to carry your desire with wisdom, to feel its fire without burning, to hold its power without being consumed. And the moment you begin to embrace the shadow, you begin to reclaim the light it was hiding, not from the world, but from you. 8. The path forward. Sacred awareness in a sexualized world. We live in a world that uses sex to sell everything. You see it in advertisements, in movies, in music, in the images that flood your screen. But most of what you're seeing is not real connection. It is performance, curated, exaggerated, and hollow. And when that becomes your only mirror, you start to believe that sexuality is something to display, prove, or control. You forget that it was once something sacred, something that lived quietly inside the soul. The danger isn't that we talk about sex too much. The danger is that we talk about it without depth, without reverence, without truth, and without space to explore what it really means to us. Carl Jung never asked people to be moral according to society. He asked them to be honest according to their own psyche, to pay attention to what stirs within them, and to respond with awareness instead of repression. Awareness is what turns instinct into insight. It's what transforms compulsion into choice. When you become conscious of your energy, you no longer need to run from it or act it out. You can walk through a sexualized world without losing yourself in it, because you know what you're carrying. You've met your longing, your fear, your hunger, and you've brought them into the light of your own understanding. This is not about purity or control. It's about presence, the ability to stay with yourself, fully, gently, and without shame. Even when the world pulls you in every direction, you do not need to silence your desire. You need to listen to what it's teaching you, and choose how you want to live in relationship with it. Not blindly, but intentionally. The path forward is not about rejecting the body. It is about remembering that the body holds sacred truth. It feels, it speaks, it remembers, and it longs for wholeness just as much as the soul does. When you bring sacred awareness to your sexuality, you reclaim something that was never meant to be lost. You begin to love without illusions, and live without splitting yourself in two. This is the quiet revolution. Not outside, but within. A return to intimacy with your own depth. A return to yourself. You were never meant to carry shame for feeling deeply. Desire was never your enemy. It was a messenger, asking you to come home to the parts of you you've silenced. If this video stirred something inside you, let it stay open. Let it be a beginning, not an ending. You don't have to understand everything today. You just have to stay close to yourself, especially the parts you were taught to hide. If this spoke to your journey, share it with someone who might be walking through the same questions. Leave a comment below about what resonated with you most. Let's make this space a place for honesty, not performance. For truth, not perfection. And if you're still searching, keep going. Because everything you've been running from might just be the doorway into your deepest becoming. You are not alone in this work, and you are not too much to be loved. Subscribe if you want to keep exploring these deeper layers with me. There's more waiting beneath the surface, and together we'll keep going inward, one honest step at a time.